Hello, music appreciation students, and welcome to part 3 of our presentation on medieval music. When last we were together, we talked about secular music in the medieval period, and I began to talk about Hildegard of Bingen and then changed my mind. I thought I would save composers for another video. So here we are. Here's that video on the composers. So, really quick forward to the composers. We're not going to really talk about any secular composers for a couple of reasons. One being, we don't know a whole lot about them. A lot of the secular music was just kind of oral tradition passed down by mouth hearing, repeating what is heard. And while we do have some music of the troubadours and troubadours, we just don't know a whole lot about the people in general. And then two, the church was so powerful and well documented. If there's one thing that you can say about the church is that they keep extremely good records. So we know quite a bit about people who are composing music for the church and their lives. So from an academic standpoint, we can have a lot more certainty with music out of the church than we can music that was secular during this time, just because the literate people were generally involved with the church. All right, so the first major composer we're going to talk about is Hildegard of Bingen. Now, Hildegard of Bingen was a female, if you were wondering, and that is really significant because if you think of the history of Western culture, it's very male heavy. We talk a lot about men, not so much about women. Women have generally played a very subservient role in the history of Western culture, not by their choice. I want that to be stressed. We just generally overlook their accomplishments, which is a shame. And I'm very proud of the fact that in music history, we recognize right off the bat the significance of Hildegard of Bingen. Now, admittedly, she's going to be the last female composer we really talk about, and that's a shame because there are several great female composers. And I try to touch on them as we get to them, because you won't find a textbook that spends a lot of time talking about them, and that's really a shame because their contributions to music are significant. But Hildegard of Bingen is just really an anomaly in a very male-dominated world. So one of the things that you will find out about her is that she was well regarded for being extremely intellectual and for having these wonderful visions. And she was the ultimate Renaissance woman before the Renaissance was a thing. So a little bit of a backstory of Hildegard. She was born into a noble family in, what we would know of as Germany today. Now, Bingen was a town. That's not her last name. Von Bingen is not her last name. She was from Bingen. And Germany didn't exist the way that we think of it today. But she was born into a very wealthy, noble family. But she was child number 10. And if you know anything about the history of the church, there's this thing called tithing, where one gives a tenth of all their increase. So she was the 10th child. She was gifted to the church. And the church relied on people, giving large sums of money, wealthy families giving large sums of money to it and for their donations. And then the church also took in a lot of orphans because if you were a poor family, that was the way you could guarantee that your child would survive. Okay? So the church just became huge because of, people bringing their children there, and then wealthy families like Hildegard's maybe giving a child, but also lots of money to the church. So the church was a massive powerhouse in that regard, and that's why we get so many educational institutions from the church. First colleges were all by the church. Hospitals were all by the church. The church took care of the needs of the people of the communities they served. So anyway, I digress. Just want you to really understand the power and the role of the church. It's amazing during this time, and it's incredible. But anyway, Hildegard of Bingen. Okay, so her family gives her to the church, and from a young age, she starts having these visions at a very young age. So today, we hypothesize, did she have migraines? Was she autistic? We're very obsessed in Western culture, so we try to ascribe a label to her. But at the end of the day, we're never going to know. But for whatever reason, her charisma was enough that even in these visions and in these states that she could be in, she was still well regarded. The superstition didn't make people fear her. They made them. She was revered by them. So these visions she would have, she started transferring them into music and into chant, and just rose in power very quickly. And you know, people sought her out. The Pope even sought her counsel on many things. That's just how powerful of an individual she was. But later in life, we know that she founded a convent, and she was writing music from these visions that she had. 77 of them still exist, like we can put our hands on them. And these were to be sung in her convents, which is just amazing. The piece that I have for you to listen to is O Rubor Sanguinis, O Redness of Blood. And it's one of her visions, and it honors Saint Ursula. And if you're familiar with the story of Saint Ursula, I wasn't. I had to look it up. But essentially, Saint Ursula was a young woman who decided to go on a pilgrimage, and she took, I forget how many other women with her. I think they even called them the Vestal Virgins that went with her. And then on the way back, they were attacked and murdered. And she became a saint. She was canonized by the church for, this martyr-like sacrifice. But what's really interesting is that just kind of went down in history as kind of like a tall tale. Like, did she really exist? And then, not too terribly long ago, I cannot remember when, but I did Google this, and I welcome you to Google it, and you can tell me what you find. But I read an article that said they actually did find a mass grave of women that would have lined up with the time frame of St. Ursula's travels. So it added sort of a certification to the fact that St. Ursula's journey did happen and that she was murdered for her faith. So I think that's really incredible. The next guy we talk about is Guido de Machaut. I know that's really hard to read, so please make sure that you're listening, that you're using your slides that are uploaded. But Machaut lived a ripe time, 1300 to 1377. He wasn't a young thing. But author, composer, courtier, he did everything. And he wrote secular music and sacred music. And he was well loved by the Catholic Church. He worked out of France. He worked for the cathedral in Reims, which was a big cathedral, rivaled the Paris Cathedral of Notre Dame. So it was a massive center, and he was the first to write a unified ordinary of the Mass. And the ordinary of the Mass is the Mass that's sung every Mass, okay? The Mass has two parts. There's the ordinary and the proper. The ordinary is what gets performed at every Mass. The proper can change depending on what saint is being celebrated or what feast day is being celebrated. But this Messe de Notre Dame, I'll let you read all of this, but I love to just tell the story of he really loved this piece, thought it was his crowning achievement, and his church loved it. So when he died, he set aside a little bit of a fund to ensure that it would be performed every Sunday. And so it was. And then when the money on that fund started running low, somebody else in the church died and gave an even greater amount of money, a behest. I can't remember what the proper term has left my head, an endowment, that's what I'm looking for, to make sure that this Mass would be sung every Sunday. And, I mean, this Mass was sung every Sunday for something like 70 years. It was really an incredible feat. So please do take a listen to that. It's a really interesting piece. Let's talk a little bit about medieval instruments really quickly. We have our hot instruments, which are the loud instruments like your brass, trumpet, trombone, the bass, which are soft, harp, lute, flute, fiddle, and the portatif organ. And then we get the big pipe organ in the church. So I think I have a video in the slideshow of some medieval instruments that you can look at. Get on Google, get on YouTube, look this stuff up. It is really fascinating, and I love how energetic and lively the secular music is compared to the very reserved, ostentatious nature of the sacred music. And you got to think about the purpose of the music. You know, the music in the church at that time was certainly not entertainment. It was about edification, it was about personal reflection, it was about making you look at the world around you and transcend to a better place. Whereas the secular music was really about distraction and about having a good time. So, you know, you got to put on the historical hat and think of, you know, try to put yourself in the mindset of somebody living during this time when you listen to this music, because it was so innovative for its time and would have been just earth shaking to hear and be a part of. So I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down the medieval period. And if you have any questions or anything, shoot me an email, and I would love to talk some medieval music with you. Hope you guys have a great one. Bye.